Alright y'all, check this out. BCM Rider here, bringing you another Commander deck tech. And today, we are looking at Kenrith the Return King. I know there's many different variants of Kenrith and all their different builds, but this one's a little different. This one I'm calling Kenrith Fight Club, because our main premise is utilizing certain creatures that have very powerful effects just by dealing damage to these creatures. Kenrith himself has 5 different activated abilities, choosing the certain color if you pay into it. If you pay red, all creatures gain trample and haste. You can pay a colorless and a green, put a +1 counter on target creature to make that creature bigger. Pay 2 colorless and a white, target player gains 5 life. If we need to gain life, we can do that. Pay 3 colorless and a blue, target player draws a card. What makes this deck very fun is its last ability of paying 4 colorless and a black, and we can put any creature from any graveyard on the battlefield under our control. So we can reanimate any creature. So let's get right into this. First up are all the creatures. Here's all the creatures that we want to deal damage to get the most value. My personal favorite is Swans of Bryn Argyle. If a source would be dealt 2 swans, you prevent that damage, and then you draw cards equal to all the damage that was prevented. So we're going to deal damage to swans and draw as many cards as possible. Now we have Brash Taunter. It's indestructible. When it's dealt damage, it'll deal that much damage to target opponent. And you can activate it to have it fight another creature. So we can deal 1 damage to that creature on its own. Or if we start putting +1 counters on them with Kenrith, we can increase this damage. Now we have the OG. We have Stuffy Doll. It's indestructible. When it enters the battlefield, you choose a player, and then anytime damage would be dealt to Stuffy Doll, it deals that much damage to that chosen player. Or you can activate it to deal 1 damage to itself. Now we have Phyrexian Obliterator. This one is very powerful. Whenever he's dealt damage, that source's controller has to sacrifice that many permanents. So we're going to use various fight spells to force our opponents to sacrifice permanents. Now we have Anti-Venom, Horrifying Healer. If we cast him, which isn't going to be difficult, even though he does cost 5 white, but we're going to have the ability of producing that certain color. But when he enters the battlefield, if he was cast, we get to return target creature from our graveyard back to the battlefield. And if damage would be dealt to Anti-Venom, we prevent that damage and we put that many +1 counters on him. So we can make Anti-Venom very big very quickly. Now we have creatures that are going to synergize with everything we're doing, and are creatures that are going to create infinite combos. So my personal favorite is Sidisi Undead Vizier. When she enters the battlefield, we have the choice of sacrificing a creature, and if we did, we get the Demonic Tutor. We get to search our library for any card and put it into our hand. It's also a 4/6 with Death Touch, so it's a pretty good blocker as well. Now we have Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. This is a 2/2 with haste, has a very good activated ability where you'll create a token copy of a non-legendary creature. That token will gain haste, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So if we pair it with something like Zealous Conscripts, when Zealous Conscripts enters the battlefield, we'll gain control of target permanent, it'll gain haste. When Zealous Conscripts enters the battlefield, we can gain control of a permanent a opponent controls. And then with Kiki-Jiki, we're going to make an exact copy of Zealous Conscripts, then have that token trigger gain control of Kiki-Jiki, which will untap the Kiki-Jiki, making another token copy of Zealous Conscripts, and you repeat this process 100 million times. Similar to that, we have Deceiver Exarch. When it enters the battlefield, you can choose to untap a target permanent you control, or tap a permanent a opponent controls. We're only focused on the untapping of a permanent we control. Very similar to Kiki-Jiki, you can either use Kiki-Jiki or a certain enchantment, which I'll get to in just a moment. Another one that does the same thing is Pestermite. When it enters the battlefield, you can tap or untap another target permanent. Now we have Godo Bandit Warlord. This on its own doesn't seem like it'll do that much, but when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an equipment card and put it straight onto the battlefield. And if Godo attacks for the first time each turn, you untap itself and all samurai you control. Then after that phase, there is an additional combat phase. So We're going to manipulate this by searching our library for a very specific equipment, which I'll get to in just a moment. Next, we have Peregrine Drake. On its own, it's a 5-cost 2/3 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you get to untap 5 lands. That sounds pretty good. But if you pair it with something like Deadeye Navigator, Deadeye Navigator states when it enters the battlefield, you can pair this with another creature as long as that creature is not paired. And if you pair that creature together, such as Peregrine Drake, you can pay 1 colorless and 1 blue. You blink out that creature. Peregrine Drake has a very good triggered ability when it enters the battlefield of untapping 5 lands. You will infinitely be able to produce mana. So you use 2 of it to blink out Peregrine Drake again, and you will produce infinite mana of all colors. Now we have Composite Golem. We can sacrifice this to add 1 color of each mana. We're going to pair this with a very certain equipment similar to Godo, which I'll get to in just a moment. Now we have some creatures that are going to help us gain more mana and just kind of deal with our opponent's stuff. So we have Birds of Paradise, Delighted Halfling. What makes Delighted Halfling very good, if it's a legendary spell, if we add mana with it and use that mana to cast only legendary spells, that legendary spell cannot be countered. Now we have Bloom Tender. For each color among permanents you control, you're going to add 1 of those colors as well. So we have the potential of adding 5 mana with Bloom Tender alone. Similar to that, we have Feybarrow Elder. He'll get +1/+1 for each color among permanents you control. So the more colored permanents you have, the bigger this guy's going to be. And you're going to add mana similar to Bloom Tender. Now, in case we need to get something back from our graveyard, we have Eternal Witness. Similar to that, we have Green Warden of Marasa. When he enters the battlefield, we get to return any card from our graveyard back to our hand. And if he would be put into a graveyard, we may exile it and return another target card back to our hand. What's going to make this very good with Kenrith is the fact we can keep returning all these creatures from our graveyard back to the battlefield, thus getting the enter the battlefield triggers to keep getting back everything we need. Now we have Glenelender Archmage. She's going to be a sitting counter spell for us. You pay 1 blue, you sacrifice her, you counter target non-creature spell. She also has Persist. If she is put into a graveyard, we can get her back with Kenrith, and she'll continue to have the Persist counter. Now we have Thalia, Heretic Cathar. This is pretty much only here just to deal with our opponents. Creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control will enter the battlefield tapped. Now we got a fun one. We have Yosei the Morningstar. Apart from being a 5/5 flyer, so it can block flyers pretty well, if it would be put into a graveyard, you get to tap down 5 target permanents a opponent controls, and they're going to skip their next untap step. So if we can constantly just keep getting Yosei back onto the battlefield, and we can sacrifice it, our opponents aren't really going to untap anything for the remainder of that game. We do have 2 planeswalkers that are really going to help us out. So we have Liliana the Last Hope. If your opponent has some smaller creatures, you can +1 her to give that creature -2/-1. If its toughness was 1, it's just going to die immediately. Or -2, you can mill 2 cards and then return any creature card from your graveyard back to your hand. And then -7, you get an emblem where every single end step, you're going to create a number of 2/2 black zombies where X is 2 plus the number of total zombies you control. Now we have Tamio, Collector of Tales. She has a really good static ability where spells and abilities your opponents can't force you to discard or sacrifice permanents. That's going to come in very handy. You can +1 her, you can name a certain non-land card, reveal the top 4 cards, then you put all the cards with the chosen name into your hand, and the rest go into your graveyard. Putting these cards into your graveyard isn't going to be that big of a deal because we can -3 her to return any card back from our graveyard back to our hand. Okay, let's get into the artifacts. First up, we have Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Thought Vessel, and Chromatic Lantern as our mana rocks. Chromatic Lantern is really going to help us out because every single land will produce whatever color we need it to be. And in case we need to gain life or protect our graveyard, we have Elixir of Immortality. I love Elixir in certain decks where you're playing from your graveyard and really trying to capitalize on casting certain spells over and over. Now, we have Altar of the Brood. Anytime another permanent enters the battlefield, each opponent will mill a card. This is going to trigger every single time if you're creating some kind of infinite loop where you're putting creatures on the battlefield. It's going to trigger this and you're going to infinitely mill your opponents. Now we have the two equipments that we're going to pair with the certain creatures to create these infinite combos. And when Godo the Bandit Lord is Helm of the Host. So when Godo Bandit Warlord enters the battlefield, you're going to search your library for this equipment. And when you go to combat, you're going to create an exact token copy. You're going to get infinite combat steps. Now we have Nim Death Metal. We're going to pair this with the Composite Golem. Whenever a non-token creature is put into a graveyard, you can pay 4 colors and return that creature back to the battlefield with Nim Death Metal attached to it. So, because we're sacrificing Composite Golem for 5 mana, we're going to only spend 4 of that mana to return it back to the battlefield, paying the 4 mana, which will attach it to the Nim Death Metal itself. And we're going to repeat this process for infinite colored mana. Okay, let's get into the enchantments. These enchantments are the main driving force in the entire build. And what better 5-color enchantment than Leyline of the Guildpact? We are running a decent amount of these Leylines. Leylines have a very special ability where if the Leyline is in your opening hand, you can start it on the battlefield when you start the game. Each non-land permanent you control will be every single color, and lands will be every basic land type in addition to their other types. So every single land will be able to produce whatever color we need it. Now we have Leyline of Anticipation. We can cast non-land cards as though they had flash. Now we have Leyline of the Void. This is going to ensure that every single card your opponent puts into their graveyard is gone, because any card that would be put into a graveyard from anywhere is exiled instead. Now we have Leyline of Sanctity. This is going to help prevent our opponents from targeting us with any spell or ability. Now we have Authority of the Consuls. This is going to help us gain life against our opponent's creatures. Your opponent's creatures will enter the battlefield tapped. And anytime a creature enters the battlefield under their control, we get to gain a life. Now we have Impact Tremors. Anytime a creature would enter the battlefield under our control, we're going to deal 1 damage to each opponent. So if we have a infinite combo going with Kiki-Jiki, Zealous Conscripts, we're going to create these infinite tokens. They're all going to enter, and we're going to deal infinite damage to every single opponent and win the game on the spot. Now we have Seismic Assault. We can discard a land card to deal 2 damage to any creature or player. So naturally, we're going to be drawing lots of land cards. We're going to discard these land cards to deal damage to the targets that are going to affect our opponents, such as Swans, Brash Taunter, Anti-Venom. Leave all the fight spells to Phyrexian Obliterator. Next, we have Rhythm of the Wild. Our creature spells cannot be countered, and non-token creatures will have Riot. Either you can put a +1 counter on them, or they're going to have haste. If for some reason we don't have Kenrith on the battlefield, this is going to ensure that all the creatures that we cast can activate abilities or attack the turn they entered the battlefield. Now we have Phyrexian Arena. Every single upkeep, we get to draw a card and lose a life. This is going to keep a steady stream of cards in our hand at all times. Now we have Wilderness Reclamation. Every end set, we get to untap all lands we control. This is going to be very good if we have Kenrith already out, because then we're going to untap all of our lands and have access to all of our mana if we need to activate Kenrith. And we have Splinter Twin. Enchant this onto either Pestermite or Deceiver Exarch. which will have the same effect as Kiki Jiki, where you're going to create infinite token copies of that enchanted creature. Okay, let's get into the instance. First up, we have all the fight cards that we're going to use. So we have Mutant's Prey. Target creature will get a +1 counter and fight a creature a opponent controls. Next, we have Decisive Denial. We can choose one of these. We can either counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 3, or we can choose to fight a creature we don't control. Now we have Tail Swipe. We can fight a creature we don't control, but if we cast it during our main phase, that creature will get a +1/+1 until the end of turn. Now we have Titanic Brawl. This does cost 2 mana, but it can cost 1 color less if the creature that we target has a +1 counter on it. We're going to fight another creature we don't control. Now we have Cetizen Tactics. This one has a additional cost to it if we choose to do it, where we can pay a additional green mana and we can choose other targets. The creature will get +1/+1 and can tap to fight another creature. So if we have multiple creatures, we can have all those creatures fight if we need them to. Now we have Dromoka's Command. We can choose to. We can prevent all damage that target instant or sorcery would deal that turn. In case your opponents have some kind of burn spell, target player can sacrifice an enchantment. You put a +1 counter on target creature, and target creature will fight another creature. Now we have Tamir Charm. Creatures with power 3 or less can't block. This would come in handy if we create a lot of tokens and we can deal damage that turn. Or we can counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. Or target creature will get +1/+1 and fights another creature. Now we got some protection spells. So we have Heroic Intervention. Our permanents will gain hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn. Now we have Teferi's Protection. Until our next turn, our life total cannot change. We gain protection from everything, and all permanents will phase out. Now we got some counter spells. So we have Arcane Denial. Now we have Thassa's Intervention. We can choose one of these. We can look at the top X cards of our library, put 2 of them into our hand and the rest on the bottom. Or we can counter target spell unless its controller pays twice X. The ability of looking at as many cards as possible, especially when you're a combo deck, is going to be very beneficial, because then we're going to find the cards we need to combo and win the game very quickly. Now we have some spells that are going to deal with our opponent's stuff. So we have Terra Sunder. We can exile target artifact or enchantment, or if we kick this, we can exile target non-land permanent instead. Now we have Crossing Grip. We're going to destroy target artifact or enchantment, but this is split second, so you're going to end the stack. That way your opponents can't respond to it. Of course, we have Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile to deal with our opponent's commanders. Okay, let's get into the sorceries. There's only 4. We have Sylvan's Shrine. That way we can search our library for any land that we need. Now we have Farseek. We're going to search our library for any land card that is not a forest and put it on the battlefield tapped. Now we have Black Sun Zenith. We're going to put X -1 counters on each creature, and Black Sun Zenith will shuffle back into our library. This is a good way to get around indestructible because you're not destroying the creature. Now we have Blasphemous Edict. We're going to deal 13 damage to each creature. This is going to be very good if you have a lot of these creatures that will prevent that damage. You're going to be dealing the most amount of damage to those creatures at once, and chances are your opponent's creatures aren't going to survive this. Okay, let's get into the land base. This is a very streamlined land base. So we have Command Tower. Now we have Reflecting Pool. This will add 1 mana of any color that our lands could produce. Now we have Exotic Orchard. Now we have all 10 fetch lands. So we have Polluted Delta, Flooded Strand, Wooded Foothills, Bloodstained Mire, Windswept Heath, Scalding Tarn, Arid Mesa, Marsh Flats, Misty Rainforest, and Verdant Catacombs. Now we have all 10 shock lands. So we have Blood Crypt, Breeding Pool, Godless Shrine, Hallowed Fountain, Overgrown Tomb, Steam Vents, Sacred Foundry, Stomping Grounds, Temple Garden, and Watery Grave. Now we have a couple tri-lands. So we have Jetmir's Garden, Spara's Headquarters, Seator's Proving Ground, Ragaran Triome, Savai Triome, and Indatha Triome. Now we got some utility lands. So we have Field of the Dead. This is going to be very fun for creating blockers that we can utilize with Liliana the Last Hope. And because we're going to be drawing lots of cards, we have Reliquary Tower. And we want to keep all those cards in our hand. Now we have one of each basic. So we have one plains, an island, a swamp, a forest, and a mountain. And that was the Commander deck for Kenrith Fight Club. I really hope you guys enjoyed this version of Kenrith the Return King. I know there's many different ways to build Kenrith. The possibilities are endless with Kenrith. It's a very fun 5-color commander. And let me know in the comments below how you guys decided to build your Kenrith build. Until next time, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share these videos, and I'll see you in the next one.